Dr. Brian Keating.
Alan, my friend, it's great to be here. My first in-person podcast since the pandemic began. Quite an honor. Good to be here.
So pumped. Into the impossible, interviewing many of the greatest minds, also professing, passing along the physics knowledge.
That's right.
The astrophysics knowledge, also the cosmic microwave background, the origins of the universe, man.
That's right. The biggest picture topics, it's, trying to get the next generation that shirt you're wearing there, inspire the next generation. Look at that. That is some serious stuff. I have the matching underwear. We can show that later. But.
That's the behind the scenes stuff.
Literally.
If you go to subscribe to Brian's channel, and then if you go to his OnlyFans page, right. He has his Big Bang underwear photos available.
Actually, they were asking me this. I was doing a documentary earlier today. I was telling you, and they're like, where did the name Big Bang come from? And I'm like, do you really want me to say? Because it could be a little bit, for PG-13. I know your audience keeps it clean, but yeah, it's funny. It's funny, all the puns. There's a lot of bad puns you can make in our industry,
Yeah, exactly. But then also authoring, losing the Nobel Prize as well. And also you have the analysis of this astrophysical data that's coming from the observatory and array in Chile. Mm-hmm. And so there's that. And so there's a lot of funding that's went into that. And so that's exciting. And then there's the Arthur C. Clarke. It's the Center for Human Imagination.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like to have a diverse portfolio of intellectual interests because I think that's what makes life interesting. You just do one thing, you get kind of, as Robert Heinlein said, specialization is for insects. You don't want to just do one thing. For me, I've always felt a lot of respect for my friends that do the theoretical physics or math, even chemistry. I was inspired by Isaac Asimov as a kid, obviously Galileo and people like that, but Stephen Hawking, Brian Greene, Lisa Randall, those kinds of names. But they're all like theoreticians. They're all theoretical astrophysicists, cosmologists, what have you. And I said, where's the place for someone who talks about experiments, actually building this stuff, hands-on, high-tech cameras, sensors, development, data analysis, cryogenics, taking these things to the bottom of the planet, to the South Pole, to the top of the Andes Mountains. I wanted to be that voice. I wanted to seek out, kind of a different niche. Not to be too over-specialized, but then broaden it out with conversations with the brightest minds, as I say, in the multiverse. And I get to do that. I'm trying to create the channel that's basically a free university, because I'm a state employee here in California. And I feel I want to give back to the public. I want to give back and create the university I wish existed when I was a kid that you won't have to pay any college tuition debt from. And you get to attend in your pajamas, so that's pretty fun.
Yeah,
it gives me a lot of gratification to do that.
Yeah, I love the component of being so driven to be a polymath and to pull from many different fields and many of the greatest minds, and then also to distill what is learned in ways that is applicable for the masses practically to apply to augment their lives. Mm-hmm. And then I love the other component, which is building up these catalogs of interviews with really thought-provoking minds, and then have that be like on all of these different interviewer channels. It's just massive catalogs of hundreds, if not 1,000 or more of these interviews with these great minds for people, like you said, in their pajamas, when they look up a key term about biology or about consciousness or whatever they're researching, that they can very easily and quickly find interviews with the greatest minds on those subjects and then pick it up themselves.
Yeah. What I always wanted to do is to kind of, rekindle. When you're in college, a lot of times my students, I just finished grading my finals. My students, I'm proud to say nobody failed cosmology this quarter. If you're out there, my friends, everyone did well. Don't worry, I just submitted the grades. If you graduated yesterday, don't worry, we're not going to take back your diploma, at least not for failing my cosmology class. But the fact is, a lot of times in college, I was fixated on my grades. I wasn't really enjoying it for the sake of the intellectual journey. And I feel like we do that a lot. We're kind of training, British gentlemen and gentlewomen of the 1700s, to have all these kinds of different attitudes and really not really training them for a craft or a trade or even to go deep. And that's fine. But I think it's also important to take a step back and say, what makes us uniquely human is our consciousness, is our humanity, is our imagination. And I start to realize when I interviewed the late, great Freeman Dyson, I'm like, a lot of these guys, men and women that I interview are getting up there in years, and I have this archival footage of them.
Yep.
9 Nobel Prize winners, 3 billionaires, 4 astronauts, one while she was on the space station, floating around answering my question.
Yeah.
How many chances do people have to do that? And I also like to do live, chats with the audience, bring them in, because then they get a chance to interact with these minds, and it's not just me, and we're networking, connecting together, this multiverse kind of hive mind, and it's just phenomenal.
Exactly.
We could only do this now. We couldn't do what you and I are doing 10 years ago. I mean, it didn't
Yep.
really exist. It's phenomenal. Let's take advantage of it.
Yep. I love that point. You get the archival footage of these greatest minds.
Yeah.
And so we've had also people on our show that have passed that we've interviewed. And so now it's an honor to have went through the process of being able to basically capture a signature of their individuated consciousness.
Correct.
And then also, I love the bringing in the audience, because then the audience, in a sense, gets like their little 5 minutes of, hey, check it out. My question got answered, and now I'm on Brian Keating's channel with that
preserved in digital amber for all of eternity.
Yep.
Carl Sagan, who's one of my great influences, I'm sure influences you. He said a book is proof that human beings can work magic, because you have this long dead author, perhaps, like with me and Galileo. I have this, platonic love affair with Galileo. And what he does for me, I hear his voice. I don't hear it literally, but wait, I'll tell you more about that later, because I am bringing his voice to life. But we hear his voice in my head as I'm reading him, and he's been dead for 400 years almost. So having that kind of connection, Carl Sagan called magic. But how much more so if you have their image and their voice, actual. Imagine if you had Galileo recording with, Brian Keating, back in 1641 or whatever on the Into the Impossible podcast. Now we can do it. There's no excuse not to. Give it away for free and just let the world have it and see what becomes of it. And, people say, oh, well, how many... why are you doing this? You're just trying to get attention, just to get clicks, just to get fame, just to get money. First of all, I'm not. If you do a YouTube channel, as to try to make money, it's not the best use of your time. There are other ways you could do. You could like be a volunteer and make more money than being on YouTube. First of all, you're at the whim of an algorithm that you can't control. You're at the whim of people's tastes, and you're at the whim of how many people want to watch a particular cat rolling a ball of yarn up a hill or something like that, which I often do.
Most of our videos about black holes get a lot less views than people dancing on TikTok.
Exactly. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not going to complain about that.
Just people are interested in watching people dance right now.
But if you get this niche, so for me, it's like to bring together these minds that usually people that have books coming out or projects that they're working on, because when you're like a kid, you lose yourself in these projects, and I want to rekindle that and show it's not only these theoreticians, the Lenny Suskins, the Max Tegmarks, the people that, similar people that you've had on the show, but it's having conversations with people that are building stuff, that are tinkering with their hands, because I think we're coming back to that now with this creator economy, but it's going to be creating things in real life and 3D printing and AI and machine learning, putting those things together and looking at data sets, connecting that, and maybe even bringing to life these ancient voices of the past. And those are the kind of the passion things I'm interested in nowadays.
Yeah, that was actually sparking while you were talking, was leveraging AI to recreate the faces and then also recreate the voices as close as we can, and then really take the natural language parsing of all of the written text and then try and figure out the proper structure of what it would be like if you could query Galileo and then have him answer back in a way that could be decentralized, disseminated out to all of the people on the planet. So there's all these different versions of Galileo and of all of the greatest minds of the past that you would have never been able to do anything else besides read the words, like Sagan said, of the books. And now with all of the AI and virtual reality and all these cool things that are blossoming, we can leverage those for educational purposes. Totally something that has been really resonant for me that I feel like you touched on, that we could potentially even play with here for a bit would be how it's almost like one of the main evolutionary points of the journey of life is where the individuated consciousness stops making it about themselves and they start making it about other people. And so that's why, you know, when you mention we're not doing this for fame, we're not doing this for money, we're literally doing this not only because it's so profoundly cool to be able to be at the edge of what humans know, but also to be able to capture these individuated consciousness, to both accumulate, to gather, to synthesize and distill and refine their most profound wisdoms, but to share it for free across the internet with people and whatnot. And so the simple like comment below in the videos where they say, wow, this profoundly augmented my life in some way, we live for that.
Yeah.
Like that is what is the essence, you could say, of why we do this.
Yeah. Yeah. From my perspective, you know, getting to see the network effect in action, you know, where you have a network and think about it, you know, we could even draw it on your board here. So if you draw like a matrix, like just an n by n matrix, and this is kind of cool that most people don't really understand, but if you draw like a 4x4 matrix with 4 rows, 4 columns, just like a tic-tac-toe board, and you know, so that has 16 different elements in it, and imagine these are people. So across the top, yep, there's 4 people across the top, 4 people across going vertically, 4 people going horizontally. That means that there's 16 different pairs between people. So there's person 1 with person 2. There's person 1. Yeah. So down the diagonal is 1 1. Just call that 1 1 1. Now go down the next diagonal is 2 2.
Right here.
Yep. And then go 3 3, and go 4 4. Now go back up next to 1 1, and call that 1 2.
Should we colon these, or
it doesn't matter?
Fine?
Commas are fine. Yep. Cool. Now go up there next to the 1 1. Up. Yep. And then call that 1 2.
1 2. Yep.
And next to that 1 3.
Yep.
1 4. And now below the next one down, go call that 2 3. It's the second row. Yeah. Oh no, above it.
2
is this?
3,
Yep. 2 3, and then 2 4, and then right below that one, call that one 3 4. Okay, so now and then there's a whole. So imagine each one of those people, 1 2 3 and 4, are the 4 people. So each person knows themselves, so that doesn't really count, right? So 1 knows himself, that's 1 1, but 1 knows 2, 1 knows 3, and 1 knows 4. Now, and if you go on the other side, the bottom half of the matrix, that's just 2 knowing 1, but that's the same as 1 knowing 2. So there's really only those 6 different pairs. Now, if you were to draw another element, just add 1 more row on that matrix, you'll do that. Now there's 5. You're going to see it's going to grow. It's going to increase not as the linear number. It's going to grow as the square.
Should we add a column?
You could add a column if you want. Yeah, add 1 more column and then 1 more row, because whatever column you add, you have to add a row. And now imagine you doubled it, whatever. The number of pairs, in other words, the number of friends that you could possibly have, is going to grow as the number of people squared. Yeah, exactly. So those number of pairs of connections that are unique are going to grow as the upper half of that triangle. And if you remember from high school math, the area of a triangle goes as the base times the altitude of the triangle. So that means it grows as the area. So that means it grows as the square. So if you double the number of people in your network, you square the number, you quadruple the number of connections between those people. Now imagine
let's repeat that stat one more time.
Yeah.
So right now we're doing a little bit of analysis of network theory.
Yep.
So like, for example, if you have let's say you've moved into a new city, you've moved to New York or whatever, and let's say when you get there that you make 5 friends.
Yep.
And so you have 5 kind of friends in maybe the first month or 2, and you're like, okay, well, you start seeing some connections form, but you're like, what would happen if I got 5 more new friends? So now
I
you
introduce them.
Okay.
Yeah. And so now there are combinations there where they don't even know you. They're like 2 and 4 are getting together. Let's call me number 1. Looking out for number 1. So numbers 2 and 4 know each other, and now they're friends, and it doesn't even have anything to do with me. So the number of connections is going to grow as your network's squared, and they're going to have all these individual connections without you. And that can go for anything. That can go for Facebook friends. It can go. You ever get like so-and-so is a friend.
Let's do that one more time. So the number of
So write down N, capital N. That's the number of people in your group.
At the top is it easier?
Yeah.
Capital
N. Yeah. And then that's a number of people. And then bottom next to it, or you can put a comma, n squared is the number of pairings or friends. So n to the second power is the number of connections or pairings of those people. And what you can start to see, imagine it's like a family. Imagine that you have 5 people in a house, husband and wife and 3 kids. So now they're all together and they're doing, whatever. And now they want to add on another kid or something like that. Do you have to build another house? Well, maybe, but usually not. But now think about like all the new connections that you start to build. You actually grow faster. In other words, if you imagine that your happiness is based on not only your individual relationships with people, how many individual relationships you have, but their overall wellness is their connectivity to other people, right? So like if your friends are all antisocial and they don't get along with people, the odds are maybe you're not going to have so many friends, right? So like in my network, let's say I interviewed 9 Nobel Prize.
We can also go back to the New York example. Yeah. So what happens when you go from having the 5 initially to 10?
Mm-hmm. Then you'll go from, let's say, n connections to n squared, and it'll be like 100 different possible connections.
New possibilities emerge.
Emerge.
So we're kind of, in a sense, we're also then another sort of way of visualizing this simultaneously could be something like that in the tree of possibility. If you sort of take the initiative to get to the, you can't really see that one that well. But if you in the tree of possibility take the initiative to go to a specific bifurcation point where you meet some people, and then from there that opens up.
That branches off. Yeah.
You get more connections from that point.
The key point is that the ratio of, let's say, happiness, it depends on the number of total connections that you spawned or you nucleated in your life. So that goes as n squared. But the cost to you just had n friends. So it goes as n squared over n, which goes as n. In other words, your happiness in life is going to grow with the number of connections that you make. So that can go for friends or it can go for podcast guests. So when I have on, so many people, I'm actually not only connecting them, like this week I had on Delilah Gates. She happens to be the second African-American woman ever to get a PhD from Harvard in physics. She and I now she's connected to Sir Roger Penrose, who won the Nobel Prize in 2020 for the discovery of Penrose diagrams, Penrose singularity theorem, etc., who is connected to Stephen Hawking. And now you can propagate it not only concurrently in time, but backwards in time, and you start to develop a very rich mesh of connectivity. It's another kind of fabric. Yeah. It's not a fabric of space-time or material fabric, but it's
a social network fabric.
It's a connectome of the brain, of external brains. In other words, your connectome is your own internal wiring of your brain. Yeah. But now we were connecting together for the first time because of the scaling power of these tools. Now I've met her in person. There are people I haven't met in person that I've interviewed, on the podcast. And maybe I'll never meet them. Some of them I've had on the podcast that you said are dead. Now you can actually have a connection between Delilah Gates, who is this wonderful young woman who's going from Harvard now down to Princeton. Now she has a connection to Freeman Dyson. Now there's connections there that can be spawned off, and now she can be connected in that way. So I think it's almost like morally imperative for people to take advantage of these tools. Now there is a downside. Should we make all the scientists have to do this kind of production or outreach?
Definitely not. Shouldn't have to do SciComm work, but it's really great to do so, and it's really great when the people that are helping them do SciComm work are people that are really good at. They're kind of like the people that help the sales teams talk to the engineers at companies. Those are the kind of like SciComm people in a sense. And then there were several things that were coming up. There's like the connectome that's happening in our brain, and then there's also the connectome that's happening like planetarily between the individuated consciousness, between all these different conscious agents. And so then there's that massive network theory that's happening. And the reason why, in a sense, it's happening is because you have the bounding function as a planet. Literally, if you could, like in a sandbox style video game, if it was unbounded, if the map was unbounded, the conscious agents would never talk to each other.
They would spread out.
They would spread out too far. And so you've done like OpenAI's done all of these neural MMO RPG style simulations, and the bounding function is mission critical. So the very fact that there's 8 billion of us bounded on a planet acts like a forcing function that we have to interact and engage with each other. And so then that's what creates all of these novel combinatorics that are endless of people connecting, finding unique novel insights, building the next cool things that enable us to do things like stream podcasts and all this type of stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the more connections we both had on Don Hoffman, who talks a lot about this. So here's an example with him. So he has this theory, of kind of like this virtual desk-type approach to reality, and he kind of has, reality is not what it seems. One of the things that he's most interested in is like the emergence of consciousness from fundamental physics. And a predecessor kind of concept to that is the emergence of space-time itself. Is space and time, our space and time, fundamental, or do they emerge from some other properties? Recent guest Lee Smolin. And by the way, I don't know how do you deal with like people, because you've had all these people, Jordan Peterson, Joshua Bach, Don Hoffman. Like, you want to talk about them and their contributions, but then, you have trolls out there and they say, oh, you're just dropping names. Like, no, I'm not dropping names. I'm going to coherently connect together what their contributions are. Don Hoffman is interested in Nima Akani Hamed at the Institute for Advanced Study. So I'm going to get him on the podcast to talk about, his fundamental emergence through the amplihedron proposal that he has that's controversial for how space and time are emergent, not truly a fundamental property of reality, and how that can or cannot supersede maybe string theory or something like that. Anyway, I'm curious. How do you handle, kind of, you don't want to overburden if you go back to episode, season 1, any tips for a beginning podcaster in that sense? Like, what do you think about that? Because you don't want to just drop names. Like, I have these legacy conversations on the one hand. On the other hand, every conversation I want to be fresh, new, actionable, and useful to a whole new audience who maybe hasn't seen it. A lot of my initial interviews
off the bat, it feels like you're doing it exactly perfectly as it is. That's been one of the core sort of like teachings across the planetary mystic and spiritual traditions, is just that as it is already perfect. And so Brian Keating, exactly as he's podcasting, is already perfect. Now, does that mean a new piece of data may come from somebody that says, hey, have you tried this other resource that may be helpful? And it's make it better. Yeah. But just generally speaking, there's so much time that we pass in these cycles of depression or anxiety, or not saying that that's what we were talking about, but that's a frequent thing that we do. But that sometimes it's just a simple recognition that me simply being alive, like the very fact that I exist, is itself already worthy.
Yeah, it's sufficient.
It's already whole. It's already full. Now, does that also mean that there's going to be a beautiful North Star and like a transcendent noble aim that I set my life towards? Of course it's also going to be that. But that's the simultaneity that kicks in. Like, right now is beautiful and perfect exactly as it is, yet also we have this transcendent noble aim that we're sacrificing the present instant gratification for some sort of delayed long-term selfless goal.
Right. Yeah. And if the intention is pure, if you're not doing it for clicks and likes and whatever, which, as I said before, if you're trying to do that and you're trying to make money from a channel, I mean, there's many, many more easy ways to do it. But I feel like a lot of people that are doing it don't really have a good metric. Like, what are they optimizing for? I'm a scientist. I'm used to optimization problems. Do I want to optimize, for cost or schedule? Do I want to get it done fast? Do I want to get it done for a cheaper budget? Do I want both? Do I want to accomplish a certain scientific scope? Do I want to detect
that looks like this it looks like a matrix trade-off
space. Exactly what happens. Yeah, so you end up doing an optimization problem. Mini-max, what's the maximum, the minimum possibilities, exactly. And we go through all these things, and it's so funny, that you mention it, because like how you agitate towards perfection without ever achieving it. But if you give up the agitation, you'll fail completely, right? So if I think about how we're planning to build the Simons Observatory, get it taking data, say late this year or perhaps early next year, and then we make what's called a risk matrix, which is exactly looks like that. So you have like what could happen, what could go wrong, and then you multiply what's the probability that it could go wrong. What's the cost to fix it if it does go wrong, or insure against it going wrong?
Yep.
What's some of the remedies if it does go wrong? And then some of the ways that you can remedy it after the fact if it did go wrong, etc. So that's called a risk matrix.
Yep.
And nowhere, and none of the people that I know in any experimental astrophysics program, from largest telescopes, space telescopes, ground telescopes, what have you, nobody had global pandemic, right? So then you ask, well, is it worth having this risk matrix if you miss the 1 in a century risk that is the most devastating to the development of the Simons Observatory, the telescope in Chile at 5,200 meters above sea level? Isn't that worth it? Like, should you just scrap the whole? No. You do what you can and you refine it. And then someday there'll be someone who will remember, hey, wait a second, back in 2019, 2020, didn't they neglect this one little very low probability event? And then didn't that end up costing them X, Y, and Z? So we do learn from it.
Very similar to the future authoring programs that like Jordan Peterson offers and whatnot, and Tony Robbins offers. Yeah. Because you are in 2015, if you go back and look at some of your notes, you'll literally look at this, like if I move to this new city and if I pursue this greater aim than what I was just in my local community doing, and then you look back 5 years, and then 5 years later you look back and you're like, well, the reason why I ended up here was because I took into account this big matrix of possibilities.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, my optimization process has changed a lot. As a younger professor, graduate student, I was trying to optimize my chances to win a Nobel Prize. I'm very candid about that. That was something I worshipped in a certain sense. I sought out really at the expense of a great deal of happiness and internal satisfaction. And it really dominated a lot of my thought process. And I think, just being completely honest, having gone through it, I still see it in a lot of other people. And my hope is that through my book, Losing the Nobel Prize, and through some of the interviews I'm doing with podcast guests, including 9 Nobel Prize winners, and through my upcoming book that's going to be in my transcriptions and edited conversations with the Nobel Prize winners called Think Like a Nobel Prize Winner, that's coming out in September, this will kind of demystify, kind of say like, to put a shorthand on it, they put their pants on one leg at a time. They're ordinary people. They have to do ordinary things. When in science, most scientists are not very into mysticism, as I'm sure you've noted. They're not spiritual. And I'm not using that as a denigration in any way, shape, or form. I've gone through phases like that in my life. But the point is, when you don't have a religion, I claim that you'll try to find a religion in some way, shape, or form. I almost know nobody who has no religion, has no kind of something that is fundamentally not provable that's taken upon faith. In science, it's often taken upon faith. These big picture questions will culminate in recognition among earthly mortals by a Nobel Prize. And so I aspired to that for a very long time. And I see people aspiring to that now. And even when I teach or when my colleagues teach, we talk about, well, this experiment was thought about and this won the Nobel Prize, or this theory, and if you can do this, you win a Nobel Prize. A guest on my show recently, Michio Kaku, has this God equation book, and I'm honored to be associated with him, to be giving out, he's going to be winning a big award that I will be announcing soon, courtesy of the Clarke Center and the Clarke Foundation. He's done a tremendous amount for the world, string field theory, etc. But he has his book and he's obsessed with the Nobel Prize. And I'm not sure he's going to watch this, but if he does, I've talked to him about it, that you put that as the grade, because we are scientists. We're used to being A+ students and getting, and never failing and never getting, and that becomes the grade. I think we're losing sight of the real goal. The real goal is comprehension and understanding of the cosmos when we're alive and able to appreciate it. Now, some say, do we have a right to do that when there's bigger existential crises that are facing us? Global warming, nuclear threats, bioterrorism, all sorts of things. Some say even things like alien, UFOs, things like this. Those could be existential threats. By what right do we have to study these questions? And yet, I feel these are the things that make us uniquely human. We study the conscious, brain. That's what we're trying to comprehend, is how do we fit into the universe? And we are the only creature that we know about that has a conscious ability to comprehend that we live in a universe that's comprehensible. And that, as Einstein said, is the most incomprehensible thing about the universe.
That's right. Yeah. So I would take that last bit And I would pose what I would say is the most upstream solution to all that is downstream, which is that you can't study without knowing the instrument itself. So you're basically perpetually overlooking consciousness or awareness to study form. And you can't do that properly without understanding the instrument itself that you're using to study the form.
But how deep do you have to go there? Because, I always feel like these questions of, well, free will and, is anybody truly free?
I'll just give you the most utilitarian reason, right?
Yeah.
Because you also gave this list of all of these styles of like sustainable development goals, style, eradicating suffering, meeting basic needs, this type of stuff. Well, in the analysis of the instrument itself, consciousness, awareness itself, in that analysis, one becomes more sovereign in their own peace and joy. And then they're able to, at a deeper level, understand the same unconditional love for the entire cosmos that these major mystical figures have talked about before, that underlying fabric of unity, like all coming from the same source. Like you can't argue and say that like I came from a different Big Bang than you came from. Right. And so basically the same comprehension, the universe comprehending itself, is what is shared among us.
The potential to do it, right? I mean, there are some people that, as we know, will watch the TikTok videos and the aspiration to do it is not in their kin. That's not something they're concerned with. So I always wonder, though, when people say, like Carl Sagan, the majesty of the universe is encapsulated in the grain of dust, or, when you look up at clouds on Jupiter, do you feel like, oh, I'm really akin to that because, I make methane and Jupiter's made of methane. No, I find it hard to believe that I would feel that kind of kinship the way I would with a puppy or even a cockroach. Like today I was walking by, I almost stepped on a cockroach, and it sounds so weird, Alan, but I felt compassion for this freaking cockroach because I've been thinking so much about artificial intelligence lately, and something like, that Michio Kaku actually said, he's like, AI, like people are like totally delusional. We're not even at the point, like it's barely like a cockroach level. Like it can't do anything that yes, it can do things faster. It can use bad statistics, machine learning. It can do funny dances and robots that look scary or whatever, but it's not really intelligent because it's really inculcated with the intelligence of its creator. And so he got me thinking about cockroaches. And I swear, I almost stepped on a cockroach. I felt like I was like killing a puppy, but I didn't I didn't kill it. And I'm like, I feel more kinship with that cockroach than I do with the planet Jupiter. So yeah, the creation source, the Big Bang. I mean, how far remote, like how far do you want to stretch it?
Let's just keep it close, right? So most of us have families and we have kids. Yeah. And so if we have families and kids, what we're typically used to is extending out this feeling of unconditional love to our nuclear family.
Yeah.
And then much of what is taught in spirituality and mysticism are simply extending the unconditional love beyond the family to the community and to the world at large, and then to the whole cosmos. So basically turning the universe itself into your own body. And in doing so, then you have that same feeling like what you described with the cockroach. You begin having that same feeling towards life itself.
Oh, certainly towards life. I'm not arguing about life. I'm not even arguing about plant life, but I'm arguing about inert things, nebulae, the Big Bang, unconscious beings, as far as we know, at least so we don't communicate with.
But like most practically for like average people in the world, they want to know, okay, so if I am going to make an analysis of a cell in biology, or if I'm going to begin studying subatomic particles in physics, maybe what does it mean for me to also become aware of awareness itself or aware of consciousness? Like, what does it mean to become aware of the instrument itself?
Sure, yeah.
And might in my analysis of that process, when like a trigger comes up, like your mom or your dad or your brother or your spouse or your kid or whatever says something, and immediately you react and get upset, and like the whole thing happens. Maybe what is then taught through these traditions is something like equanimity, where you can basically train this emptiness, where you see this trigger come, and it's like the sensitivity to see the trigger come, create a sensation in this web of the chemoelectroconnectomics we were talking about earlier. And then you basically watch it dissolve rather than react that massive cascade of anger. And then what you're left with is, again, the peace and the joy. And then you're basically regaining sovereignty, and you're regaining that, then strengthening the unconditional love with your family and beyond. And so there's this deep practicality, not only in when you go out and study form afterward, but also in your moment-to-moment experience, suffering less, being less depressive, being less anxious.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
there's
I look at that,
practicality to it.
especially when I'm here, when I have the pleasure of being in Los Angeles up from San Diego. Sometimes on a dark night driving home, and you're coming over a mountain or something here, and you look out, or you're flying into LAX or something like that, and it's almost impossible for a human being, even if you look up at all the stars in the night sky, if you go out to the desert, go out to Joshua Tree, go out to wherever you want here, the human eye can only see about 6,000 individual discrete stars, right? But if you're flying into LAX, or you're coming over one of the mountains in Topanga Canyon, whatever, you're doing a drive at night here, I urge people to do that. You look out, you see tens of millions of discrete lights. Now imagine each one of those is a little soul. There's a human being responsible for that light, in that light. Then I can feel excessive compassion. In other words, the avatar for the individual soul or spirit that's there, I can feel a love towards, I could feel that. But to say that, oh, well, the quarks that make that person up, I should also, no, because for me, then I start to think, well, do I have compassion for a virus? Do I have is it the constituents? No, it's the organized form. It's the assembly. It's the de-entropy of the process, that the organizational structure of the process. And the more complex it is, and the more finely assembled it is, the harder it is to represent in a simple equation, the less compressible something is. And I think a human being is infinitely complex and also complicated. In other words, like a 747 is really complicated because it takes a lot of parts. It would take you or I a long time to build it. We could build it given all the parts and the right machinery, but it's not complex in that it requires an infinite amount of information to encapsulate what it is. Like white noise is complex, or pi could be, pi is not complex. But in other words, it's not computable. So in this sense, for me, it's harder to relate to the abstract kind of panpsychist approach to reality or consciousness. And I do, I'm an experimentalist. So I like to build stuff. And you're talking about the sensory organ and sensing itself. So I've become very interested lately in these questions of the, in terms of the origin of the universe. Is there a way to specify the sensory organ, the sensory apparatus, the sensory laws at the time of the beginning, if indeed there was a beginning? And if there wasn't, can you represent that? And typically this goes by the name of the Wheeler-DeWitt equation, or some, pan quantum mechanical wave function. So this is orthodox quantum mechanics. It exists in various versions of even alternatives to things like string theory called loop quantum gravity. I'll have a video about that hopefully this week, kind of a primer on what loop quantum gravity is as an alternative to string theory, why it's important. But one of the foundations of it is this Wheeler-DeWitt equation, which is really saying you have a wave function. Let's not get into what that means, but symbolically there's some entity that surmises all the different particles, energies, fields, forces, and so forth in the universe. And then there's some dynamical law or operator that operates on that. But my question is, where does that come from? Like, does the math predate the universe? Do we have to think about who created the math? Even absent the mind, behind it, like an intelligent designer, I'm not going to argue one way or another, but do you need the math? Do you not need the math to make these predictions about the sensory organ? Because as you know, in quantum mechanics, you can't make a non-destructive measurement of many different processes that we call important or interesting. Collapse of the wave function, Heisenberg uncertainty principle. These are destructive measurements. So too with the brain. Can you imagine measuring the wave function of the brain? Is that even conceivable? But even more simple than that, elementary than that, is the wave function of the universe. where does that exist? Does it exist in a mind? Where does mathematics exist? Sometimes I say to my friends, like, does a triangle exist? I'll ask you, does a triangle exist? Can you give me a triangle?
So wouldn't another approach to this same line of thinking be that the universe is a mechanism for exploration and for comprehension of infinite possibility? And so there isn't a something outside of what the universe is that acts as a top-down force. It is simply, we are the force. We are the very force that we're looking for. So as in, the universe itself is the way that we sort of design the process of comprehending infinite possibility. So we use the universe as a reality design mechanism to comprehend infinite possibility. So we are it. This is what is called non-duality. There's no dualism. There's no separation between yourself and the absolute or yourself and the highest. You are the highest. You are it. We are it. And that we use this style of reality design and exploration of infinite possibility as the highest to play, to explore. And so this is like a later stage or advanced stage of mysticism or spirituality, but it plays very well with science. It's not like science and spirituality are not separate things. They're actually one thing that then we create an illusory barrier between and separate. And so when you merge the two together and you sort of do the process of what, when Brett Weinstein was moderating Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson in conversation, Brett was talking about this also as a sorting algorithm. And so in a sense, the analogy that's been used for a long time is you drain the dirty bathwater and then you take the clean baby. And so we also talked about this in HighLevel Perception, which is the first visual distillation that we made, and that you want to archive the dogma and the fundamentalism from the world religions, but in science, you also want to archive the perverse incentives that exist, that you also write about in Losing the Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
And you want to retain the beauty of the scientific method and reproducibility, replicability. You want to retain of spirituality what is simply called, like we talked about earlier, is, well, how do I reduce my suffering? How do I have more peace? How do I have more joy? Just the very simple stuff. But also what is called, mysticism or yoga is just simply becoming one with God or the absolute or divine. And that process of union is most typically just a turn inwards rather than what you're perpetually overlooking is consciousness itself, is awareness itself. It's so profound, the fact that you have this power to know, and that we share this power to know. Like the universe, a product of the universe is the power to know that then can like turn on itself and be like, dude, what? Did we just make a universe to like play and explore? But we like overlook it. We're like, consciousness isn't that cool.
Right,
like,
yeah. It's this woo-woo stuff. Yeah, I mean, my issue with it is, people get attracted to the kind of hardcore science, brass tacks. Let's measure these things. Let's build these satellites, blast off these rockets. And that's all great. And I love that. And I'm inspired by that. And I do that. But on the other hand, what scientists are really good at are the how questions. How does this reaction take place? How did the first elements on the periodic table get formed? How did these photons, interact with matter that comprise the cosmic microwave background radiation? And maybe the what is the universe made of? What's the curvature of space and time? But what we really care about as human beings is the why. It's like your kid asks you, can I do this? Why? Why not? Why not? And the ultimate answer is always because. Like, you can't tell them the reason. There's no answer other than because. In this case, you can't, and I made this analogy. I was talking with Freeman Dyson, late great Freeman Dyson was the first guest on my podcast. And, I was asking him, well, you don't call yourself an atheist, but you're not like practicing. And he's like, so how do you reconcile your religion and your science? He's like, well, religion is talking about God, which is a great mystery. And science is about like solving puzzles. Like a puzzle and a mystery are different things. They're categorical different classes. Like a puzzle is like a Rubik's Cube or a crossword puzzle. Like I might not be good at that. Like my mom is awesome at solving crossword puzzles. I'm just terrible at them. My kid can solve a Rubik's Cube. I can solve it too, but I'll take it apart, whatever. But other things are mysteries. And mysteries may or may not be solvable by any human being, right? So I always joke, my job is to turn as many mysteries into puzzles as I can while I can. And I think that's the why versus how, or why versus what. And the meaning questions come from the why, wrestling with the why. My religion is Judaism, and that the word Israel in the Hebrew language means to fight against God. It's a very interesting word, right? Like you think, oh, like Jews are really, they're like worship God. No, the divine. No, you're fighting with God. You're asking questions. You're wrestling. I don't believe that. Let me struggle. And that's the whole Socratic Talmudic method that we've been, kind of heir to for thousands of years. But the question is, when do you stop? When does that turn off? And one of my friends, James Altucher, is a famous writer, podcaster himself. He said, kids stop laughing. They laugh like 300 times a day when they're 5 years old, and adults, we laugh, 5 times a day if we're lucky. So somewhere along the way, there's like a 60-fold attrition factor. Where does that go? And we were talking the other day, and I'm just like, yeah, but when you're a kid, you cry over everything. And as you're an adult, you don't cry about almost anything except if it's really bad. So I guess, there's a trade-off of these two different emotions. But the bottom line is, how do you, kind of recapture that, or when do we lose the asking the why questions and only focus on the how questions as scientists? That's something that, I'm really obsessed with, is how do we get to the why more often than just the how?
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you what I feel like is really relevant for what we're talking about right now. So what we have is, this is on HighLevelPerception.com, which is, like I said, that first visual distillation that we did. And so what we have are, if you go under designs, right? So first thing is that this is that sorting algorithm visualization, right? So when you drain the dirty bathwater from two different things, and then you uplift the baby and you synthesize it together into one, like science and spirituality, or another common one is individualism and collectivism, or another common one is the left and right politically in the US or the US and China, or what have you. You can do this endlessly. So there's that style visualization. And then the other one that you were just mentioning, which is this one's called the edge. And in this one, the idea is very similarly to what you were saying, is we're basically over time undergoing a process of continuously pushing the edge of what is known. And then though it's where all of these different puzzles and all these different, you're basically planting a little flag beyond the edge, and you're like, that's our hypothesis. Let's do scientific method style experiments to prove it. And then as you do, boom, 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 you push out the edge further. And now, like we showed in this network theory example, boom, now a new, just like, Satoshi Nakamoto publishes the Bitcoin white paper in 2008. And now all of a sudden, 13 years later, you're like, it's this fractal of cryptocurrencies and decentralization technologies and insanity that's emerged. And so these are the styles of visualizations and processes that can sort of help people understand what we're talking about. But yet simultaneously, if you're not going to start with and this is visualized here quite simply. If you're not going to start with this, which is like, the magic trick, if you're not going to start with the question of, okay, ha, 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 this is a universe, and ha, 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 we're humans on some planet orbiting a star, ha, ha. Okay, but why are we here? Right. Like, come on. Like, I'm going to play this game, but I want to know why. And so then you can just do simple things like make what science may say is, this is a big leap, this is a big jump. But really, if you turn inward, you can come to the understanding of this, which is that this is a conscious singularity. This is infinite oneness. this is one infinite creator endlessly expressing itself and using a universe and fractaled out as individuated consciousness to be able to explore and understand.
Yeah, I guess for me, the challenge is when you get to incompatible hypotheses. So let's take general relativity and the hypothesis of a new planet inbound of the planet or inward of the planet Mercury. So just for the listeners that might be not so clear, back in the 1700s, it was noticed that the planet Uranus was moving in a strange way. And there was an astronomer by the name of Leverrier who was observing this planet's motion, Uranus, this planet just beyond the orbit of about twice the distance from Saturn, from the Earth as Saturn. And he noticed it was behaving very strangely, and he said maybe there's another planet pulling on this planet Uranus, and that's causing its motion to move. And we can't see it, but if I look at historical data tables, I'll be able to determine where it was in the past if it's just a chunk of dark matter. Literally, a chunk of dark matter, which is Uranus, which was Neptune, later found to be called Neptune. He predicted it based on laws of universal gravitation predicted by none other than Isaac Newton. So in other words, using Newton's laws applied to the strange anomalous behavior of the planet Uranus, he predicted the observation of dark matter in the form of Neptune, an unobserved planet. And then we observed it, and it's not dark. It reflects the light of the sun, but it's so faint and so small you can't see it unless you know exactly where to look, which he provided. Then he said, let me turn my telescope on the planet Mercury, which also behaves strangely. So it's orbiting, and its orbit is advancing slightly too much per year than it should be if Newton's laws of gravity behave the way that we expect them to, and they seem to hold over the course of the entire universe. Hence, they're called the law of universal gravitation. He said, I knew I was right the first time I proposed a new planet back, when I proposed Neptune. Let me propose a new one called Vulcan. And Vulcan orbits on the other side of the sun from us, so we can never see it, but it pulls gravitationally on the planet Mercury, and it's locked just the same way we only see the one side of the Earth, of the moon, so too with Mercury, so we'd never see it, but it would pull it. Of course, we now know that this is completely wrong. The reason that Mercury's orbit behaves so anomalously is because of the curvature of space that's warped by the presence of gravitational mass in the form of the sun, courtesy of Albert Einstein, so the theory of general relativity. So in one case, you would say, well, the guy's brilliantly right. He proposed this one solution, this hammer. He had a hammer. He hit the nail on the head with Neptune, and then he tries to apply it again. So he was right, and then he tries to apply the same exact tool, the same sensor, as you were saying earlier, to the exact same type of problem. It's just a planet behaving badly, but he's totally wrong. So do you say that those are just two manifestations of the same consciousness or the same truth? One is right and one is wrong. So in other words, we can't do anything with Vulcan, but we can do something with Neptune. So he was right and wrong on that front, but we don't use the wrong part at all, and we only keep the right part. So how do you reconcile those two?
Or another way to phrase this is, how does the universe understand itself?
Yeah, or get to the truth, or whatever that means. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, well, what sensor does the universe use to understand itself? And what would your answer be to that?
Well, I'm saying based on observation.
Yeah. And so, but what is the observer? Like, what is that?
Yeah.
Or another way to say this, who is that? Are we talking about ourselves? Are we talking about consciousness? Are we talking about awareness?
Well,
is that what is used to understand the universe?
You could say that, both, you can say Isaac Asimov said something like this. He said, if you say the Earth is flat, you're wrong. If you say the Earth is a perfect sphere, you're wrong. Technically, you're wrong. It actually bulges a little bit at the equator. It's flattened a little bit at the poles because the Earth was molten and it spins and it distorts, right? And it's plate tectonics. So you're wrong, but who's more wrong? So are you allowed to say, according to the same score, if you're in the same framework, that the flat Earth is wrong and the bulged Earth is right, or and the spherical Earth is right? Or where do you draw the line? Who gets to say that, it's not scientific progress to say the Earth is actually closer to round than it is to flat? Like, who gets to be the judge? I would say it's judged on observation, which is why I run into problems with things that are in principle unobservable, like I study the multiverse. How do you judge the efficacy, the accuracy, the applicability of something like the multiverse, which may be impossible even in principle or even in theory to observe? In other words, a parallel universe existing contemporaneously, or maybe not, in space or in time or both? These are fascinating questions which we may never be able to answer. And yet we've been faced with such things before, steady state universe versus a Big Bang. We never thought, although if you asked Einstein in 1915, could you, prove that the universe had an origin? He would have said, you're stupid. There is no origin of the universe. The universe is basically static. And then 14 years later, he was disabused of that notion. So I guess my question is, do you get to have a rubric? Do you get to have a metric and say relativity is better than Newton's gravity? The curvature of space is better than planet Vulcan.
Okay, so we could even just go to a very simple fundamental, which is, do you prefer happiness, peace, joy? Do you prefer that, or do you prefer suffering?
I do.
Depression.
I do, but okay. I know people who don't.
Right, and
yeah.
so now we're just doing a pretty happy versus depressed style juxtaposition.
Mm-hmm.
And when we do that, and then we say, okay, let's say out of 8 billion people, 7.9 or whatever, besides the trolls, say that they prefer to be happy rather than depressed. And so now you would say, okay, well, what's like you were indicating earlier, what is the general rubric that we can potentially civilizationally agree on is an optimized way for us to use this instrument of consciousness, of awareness, to become more sensitive to guiding us towards happiness and towards joy and towards peace and away from suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's both. It's always both. It's always simultaneous, where it's both this sovereign style of, like we gave earlier, that example with trigger, and yet it's also meeting basic needs. Because when the basic needs are met, it's much easier for you to also not need to be anxious and survival instinct roaring all the time. Right. And so you have the simultaneity where you have the saliency and the importance of the analysis of form and leveraging that to maximize human potential, mission critical. And yet simultaneously the turn inward and the true analysis of the very unit, the very vehicle, the very instrument that the universe uses to observe and to interpret and to understand, to comprehend. And so when you do both of those simultaneously, that's kind of the spirituality and the science then merge together into one. And that's
when you say the instrument, do you mean human, like Homo sapiens, or do you mean just I agree with you, actually, Alan, but there are people who will say, well, how do you know? How do you know the cockroach that I was so gracious and beneficent towards didn't step on today? How do you know that cockroach doesn't have consciousness? And
might not be dog and the cat, clearly does have,
the bonobo,
experience.
Correct.
It clearly has.
Suffer. Sure.
Exactly. Yeah.
So is that less of an experience of consciousness? I think so. But how do you answer people like that say, well, you think because you can build a sensor that you can cool down to absolute zero, take to the edge of space in the South Pole or in the Atacama Desert, that because of that it's superior? You're only here because the Homo sapiens killed off the Denisovans and they have slightly denser connectomes or whatever. I personally don't find that very, very sentient. That doesn't bother me so much that we're here and we're able to appreciate. Because as you say, you can wonder about why we're wondering about stuff, or you can say, well, let me actually try to make progress and make something meaningful. And I think Viktor Frankl said it well. The search for meaning is second only to food and the Maslow hierarchy of need and physical safety. It's really only second to that. And some people, it's above even, other desires that they have for fame and for wealth and things like that. So I think, having an actual meaning in one's life, and the more that you have meaning, I think the more fulfillment that you can have. And to me, these questions, it's just funny because some of the deepest meaning I have is from trying to wrestle with questions that may never be answered, right? And I think that's the deliciousness of life.
Yeah, because we simultaneously must humble ourselves to the extent at which we understand that we're part of an infinite mystery.
Correct.
Yet also be willing to perpetually go deeper and deeper in our understanding of what this reality is and
Yes.
why we're even here
Yes.
and that process. And so that's why this turn inward and becoming really strong at that, while also the manipulation of form and maximizing the basic needs being met and this type of stuff, like those two being merged together into one seems to be one of the pinnacle recipes for that. And it also is like one of the most interesting things about the turn inward is that once you get to the more kind of advanced non-dual stages of awareness, when your sense of identity has shifted from like a separate person, like I'm this Atlas Allen unit of life, rather than being a separate unit of life, I become the actual universe itself. I am that itself. That then this style of like barrier or separation between the two individuated units, it dissolves more and more. So I begin radiating like the sun does. Like the sun does not discriminate and begin serving with its unconditional love light that provides the planet with its life. It does not discriminate. And it's just the cloudy perception of the human itself that makes it, in its expression, not be able to see the sunlight essence that is what is omnipresently always already free
Right.
and there and
you only see in
radiating.
humans the ability to reject, a purpose. Like an animal doesn't have the luxury of rejecting, its basic biological needs. In other words, it has a need to feed itself and to feed its young, or whatever biological imperatives it has. It can't ignore those. Even a dog, like it will show love, and it's funny, in Hebrew the word for dog means similar to love. The word actually means it is like being loved in some sense, some translation of that. Isn't that interesting? Like a dog loves you, and it looks like that, and it will behave like that. But, obviously you don't treat it well. It shouldn't behave like that, right? But human beings have this ultimate kind of luxury that we can ignore this unique thing that we have. In other words, a dog has to, the wild dog has to take care of its needs. It can't just like make puppy eyes at some owner and get fed, right? It has to go and dig into the garbage and eat food. But a human being is the only animal that has the luxury to not have to do that. Like, in other words, to not have to think about the grand questions of existence, or to squander the precious few moments of life that it's given. And to even deny that it's meaningful, or to deny the value of other people. That's what really gets me. I was thinking the other day, people are talking so much about artificial intelligence, alien life. And they said, I want to ask you, Alan, actually, they said, tomorrow they discover alien life. It's proven, there's some talk about UFO, whatever. We confirm 100% scientific evidence. There is alien life on some planet. We can easily detect it. What do you think the next day? What happens? Does the world change? Does the world stay the same? What do you personally think?
The analogy is just like what we just went through, which is that when you, quote, become more awakened or become more enlightened, or you gain more of what the greatest mystics or sages have talked about, that this so-called barrier between the units of life dissolves more and more, right?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing with the planet and with another planet.
Yes.
Is the barrier dissolves more and more. That the life that is birthed on another rock orbiting a star is not different than it's beautiful. It's the same universe, but it's also beautiful in its difference, in the sense that although it's the same awareness or the same consciousness that we're talking about in its most pure or bare state beneath everything here, it's also cool that our costumes are different.
Yes.
Right?
So we all interact differently.
And so that's the unity and diversity simultaneously. Or another way to visualizing that is just like the life that is birthed on the different planets. Brian's got to go soon.
Yeah.
So we're going to get him out here in a moment. It's the similar thing with life on different planets.
Yes.
So the
Well, I think,
unity
though, that-
of
yeah.
the universe, but the unique diversity that is birthed on the different planets. Because it's going to be a different vehicle of sentience.
Yeah. I think, though, we already know what's going to happen, because we've seen this over and over again on Earth. We see species getting rid of, if you found a cockroach on Mars, that would be like headlines all over the world, right? In other words, something that's that advanced. And I look at, when I see a bonobo or, capuchin monkey, or we have like 99.9% similar genetics to them. I'm not talking about like a slime mold on the ice cave of Europa. I'm talking about like 99, like right on, you can go to Africa and go and meet one, or go to the San Diego Zoo. You'll meet one of them, right? And yet we devastate them. We destroy them. And like, we don't care about them. We're going to care more. We're going to feel better about ourselves and our humanity. We find that there's a slime mold on the planet Jupiter's moon Europa. I doubt it. So I'm less sanguine. Look at the history of the 20th century. What was done to our people, in different instantiations throughout the last 100 years plus. It's awful. The human being's record of self-reflection and majesty is quite bad. That's why I look at it and say, well, who is the judge? Like, of the, who sets the agenda for what counts as a conscious agent? Because does a conscious agent have to be good? Does it have to agitate for goodness, happiness, equanimity, and all the wonderful things that you say? I agree with you. I think a healthy person does, but there's a lot of unhealthy kind of vitriol in the world, as evidenced by just, pick up the newspaper. And so I do think about that. I worry about, humanity, and I think it's almost a fantasy. And I talk to my colleagues in chemistry and biochemistry, SETI, people. They think it's just going to be this huge breakthrough and people are going to go, wild in the street. There's going to be peace and love. And I'm like, go down to the beach, scoop up a handful of, of sand crabs or whatever. Like, there's your life. Like, you don't have to go out and search. I'm not saying don't go out. Believe me, I'm an astrophysicist. I'm searching for all the mysteries of the universe that I can possibly answer. I'm not saying don't do it, but don't delude yourself that you're going to find meaning in it necessarily. If you do find there's a biomarker out in space or something like that. I'm talking on Wednesday with Adam Frank, who wrote a wonderful book called Light of the Stars. He's a professor at University of Rochester, writes for NPR and many other sites. And he's talking about looking for alien civilizations, not by their radio signals or their atomic bombs or their spacecraft, but looking for the effects of global warming that's produced on their planets. In other words, when we created agriculture as Homo sapiens, that led to a changing of our climate on a global scale. And he thinks that could be done on another planet. We could look for the telltale signs of a civilization by looking for chemical signals in their atmosphere. So that's Wednesday morning on my channel.
Yeah, the NASA and SETI folk have called it the exoplanet biosignatures.
Correct, yes.
Which is really interesting. Okay, to wrap, could we potentially call reality a manifestation of infinite possibility?
I mean, you can call it what you like. I feel like its reality is subject to so many definitions that, to me, as an experimental scientist, it's frustrating. In other words, I can talk about perception. I can talk about sensors. I had this conversation with Deepak Chopra and with Don Hoffman. Yeah, and the question is, what interacts with a sensor? How do you perceive it? Can you detect a soul? Does that mean that things that are not detectable now are forever not detectable? That's the question I don't think a scientist would say in the affirmative. So these are interesting topics. I think that they are far enough removed from my ability to define them that I spend most of my time thinking about the question rather than trying to come up with that answer.
I feel like the level of resonance with that is pretty much what science, logicians, Kurt Gödel's, etc., have been for the longest time, being like, yeah, this is pretty much where science and spirituality overlap, that the universe is a manifestation of infinite possibility. You'll never come to the end of infinite possibility.
Sure.
That's why it's infinite possibility.
Yeah.
And the universe is a manifestation of that explorative essence of what the true nature is. And we use these conscious agents as the mechanism to be able to do said exploration of infinite possibility. I feel like that's where the overlap is, and that's where this next 100 years and beyond is really going to be focused on.
It could be. And the thing I point out all the time is that, computers are wonderful assistive devices. They enable our world. They help us dramatically. However, they don't. They lack the ability to comprehend the infinite. In other words, when you ask a computer to do something infinite, like it will approximate infinity by a large number divided by a very small number. Its largest capable number divided by its smallest capable number. But that's not really infinity by an infinite amount. That's off by an infinite amount. So how close could it actually get to describing not just an infinitesimal point like a zero-dimensional object? Could it describe a singularity? Could it describe the origin of the universe if indeed there was a singularity? Can it comprehend? No, I think maybe perhaps we'll find that only a human brain can comprehend the infinite. And that to me would be astounding.
Such a good way to wrap. Beautiful. I love it. Brian, this has been a fantastic round
so
number
much
one,
fun.
my brother.
It's great to be with
Such
you.
a
It's
good
great to
one.
be in person. My first podcast, local live, and I'll be back in LA, my brother.
Fuck
Great
yeah.
to meet you.
I'm so pumped. I'm so pumped for these rounds. They're so strong. And it's a really great vibe on that. Both the into the impossible vibe of interviewing so many great minds and then also becoming more and more of a polymath and disseminating that to the public. And also the links are in the bio below to Brian's channel. Go and subscribe to the channel and check out his massive catalog of interviews, and also the links below to his website. You can find his book there, as well as you can go and give him a follow on Twitter and Instagram and whatnot. And also let us know your thoughts in the comments below on the episode in general. We would love to hear from you. Like the video, rank it up in the algo, subscribe if you haven't yet to the channel, and also share the video with other people that you feel like it would resonate with. Because these are the types of conversations that will hopefully be further making relatable distillations to the masses around the core essence of science, of spirituality, weaving those two together, these types of things, how to make people's lives practically better, how to make the collective practically better. Yeah. Beautiful.
Awesome, man.
Beautiful. Simple stuff. Love you, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
That's
Thanks
awesome.
again, Brian. Cool. All right. Much love. Peace, everyone.